Hi, and welcome to our final learning objective in Chapter 3. Remember, Chapter 3 is difficult, and a lot of students have trouble with it. So please, if you'd like to see additional problems, we're going to work one right now. But if you'd like to see some more, I'd be happy to work some more problems for you. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump at it. I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay. All right, so in this particular objective, we want to give us some more practice on this. And so let's see. Come on, work with me here. Okay. So we're going to apply the theory of comparative advantage to everyday life and national policy. A lot of problems in your book will apply it to everyday life. For example, if you have employees and you have to schedule an employee, how do you decide which station an employee will work at? And how you can do that is you can look at who has a comparative advantage. And you're actually going to have higher productivity as a result. So this is how we would use it in everyday life. This example is more of national policy, very similar to countries like we looked at before. Okay, so let's get some more practice under our belt. And what I'd like you to do is to look at the problem, pause the video, and then you work it and then check your answer and see where you might have went wrong, or if you got it right, good for you. All right, so we have two countries, Argentina and Brazil. Notice here in this problem, they both have the same number of labor hours. That's going to happen in your problems. You're not going to have that disparity that we had between the US and Japan of a difference of 20,000 labor hours. So here we have Argentina and Brazil each having 10,000. Argentina producing 1 pound of coffee requires 2 hours. 1 bottle of wine takes 4. Brazil, 1 pound of coffee takes 1 hour. 1 bottle of wine requires 5. Our questions are, which country has an absolute advantage in the production of coffee? Which country has a comparative advantage in the production of wine? A third question I like to ask students when I ask you to do this in class is, what is a fair price for 1 bottle of wine? Just to give us some additional practice in finding prices as well. Okay, so go ahead and pause here if you'd like, or if you want to follow along, that's fine. So let's start with what we know in Argentina. Okay, so I'm going to start with Argentina. And in Argentina, I have 10. We want to start with that all and nothing approach. Okay, if you don't know where else to begin, that's the best place to start. So I'm going to imagine that Argentina just does coffee. So right now they have 10,000 hours for coffee. Takes 2 hours to produce 1 pound of coffee. So they can do 5,000 coffee and no wine. Okay, 10,000. Now we're just going to imagine doing wine divided by 4 hours is going to give us no coffee and 2,500 wine. I'm going to do this one the long way because I think it's important that we look at both ways that we could possibly solve this. I apologize for the very poor drawing. Okay, 0, 0, we have X and we have Y. We have 2 endpoints. Now, which one is going to go on the Y-axis? Remember, it's the biggest number. Because the biggest number is coffee, I'm going to put coffee here on the Y. And I'll just put a 5,000 there. And I'll put a 2,500 here. Because Y is coffee, that means wine is going to be on the X by default. I'm going to attach the 2 with a straight line. Why did I use a straight line? Because we're talking about one and only one factor of production here, labor. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and write out my points. This is 2,500 and 0. This is 0 and 5,000. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and make my X, my Y. 1s and 2s. I'm going to go ahead and write the slope formula. Y2 minus Y1 over X2 minus X1. Remember, take the absolute advantage. It'll always be negative because it's illustrating opportunity cost. So we have 5,000 minus nothing over 0 minus 2,500. This is where I want you to make sure you label. What are Y's? They're coffee. What are X's? They are wine. So we have 5,000 coffee to 2,500 wine. So that is a 2 coffee to 1 wine ratio. Now I can go ahead and express that, and I can say, I'll just do it up here if that's all right with you, that the opportunity cost of 1 wine is 2 coffee. Every time I produce 1 wine, I give up 2 coffee. The opportunity cost of 1 coffee is taking the reciprocal 1/2 wine. So that's all I can do with Argentina, and I'll have to come back and gather this information. But let's go on and look at Brazil. In Brazil, 1 pound of coffee requires 1 hour, 1 bottle of wine requires 5. So I'm going to do this one a little bit shorter way. So Brazil has 10,000. Again, I still have to do that all and nothing approach. 10,000 labor hours divided by 1 gives me 10,000 coffee and no wine. 10,000 divided by 5 gives me no coffee and 5. Oh, not 5, silly me. How about a 2? Oh, I didn't mean to erase all that. Let me do it one more time, sorry. 10,000 divided by 1 gives me 10,000 coffee and no wine. And 10,000 divided by 5 gives me no coffee and 2,000 wine. So now at this point, what I'd like to do is I could graph it, but I want to do this one the short way. So let me go ahead and clear that little graph point that I just made. And there we go. Okay, so let's get back to my pen. All right, so now I can just put the 10,000 coffee over the 2,000 wine. And I end up with, crossing my zeros out, 5 coffee to 1 wine. So now I can say, okay, the opportunity cost of 1 wine is 5 coffee. The opportunity cost of 1 coffee is 1/5 wine. And again, I'll probably have to gather that because I need to put it into a trade table. Okay, which country has an absolute advantage in the production of coffee? Remember, absolute advantage, who can produce the most? So let's go back and look at our work and decide who that would be. And okay, who can produce the most here? Okay, so I have, I'm just gonna highlight my answers here. I have 10,000 coffee, okay? And then going back to Argentina, I have 5,000 coffee. So to me, it looks like that Brazil can produce the most coffee. So who has a comparative advantage? I'm sorry, an absolute advantage in coffee? That would be Brazil, because they can produce more. Remember, that doesn't have anything to do with trade. Like, it's not a trade decider. Who has a comparative advantage in the production of wine? At this point, what I want to do is to draw a trade table. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and put my countries on the top: Brazil, Argentina, and my products along the sides on the rows. So we have wine and we have coffee. Now I want to go back and gather the opportunity cost of each. I'm going to go ahead and fill in Brazil first because that's what I wrote first. So from our previous slide for Brazil, we said the opportunity cost of 1 wine is 5 coffee. Opportunity cost of 1 coffee is 1/5 of wine. This is where I'm gathering that information from. Go back to my trade table. So every time I produce 1 wine, I give up 5 coffee. Every time I produce 1 coffee, I give up 1/5 of wine. I now want to go back to my work that I did for Argentina, and I'm looking at this information up here, and I'm going to gather it. Opportunity cost of 1 wine is 2 coffee. Opportunity cost of 1 coffee is 1/2 a wine. So again, going back to my trade table and filling in that information, every time I produce 1 wine in Argentina, I give up 2 coffee. And every time I produce 1 coffee, I give up 1/2 wine. At this point, I want to go ahead and ask in my trade table which number's lowest for each row. And so if I look, I have a 5 and a 2. 2 is lower than 5. Draw an arrow up to Argentina, over to wine. 0.5 is 2.0, 0.50. So 0.20 is smaller. So Brazil, I'm gonna draw a circle around that 1/5 over to coffee and up to Brazil. Okay, so essentially what I have here is now I know the comparative advantage. And so the comparative advantage is that Argentina has a comparative advantage in wine. And Brazil has a comparative advantage in coffee. Okay. Now, again, I said I like to throw extra problems in here sometimes. So let's see what else we could figure out from the trade table. I would ask you, what is a fair price for 1 bottle of wine? So when Argentina exports, because again, the circles tell us who exports. So Argentina is going to export, wine and import coffee. We can see that from the trade table, and we can also see that Brazil is going to export coffee and import wine. Okay, now again, what else we can tell from the trade table are these fair prices. So what's a fair price for one good in terms of the other? And I asked you, what was a fair price? Every time Argentina exports 1 bottle of wine, how much coffee will it want in return? So what's a fair price for wine? I'll put exchange. I think that's better. For wine. Again, how do I do this? I'm looking at wine, so I go to my wine row. Remember, outside in on this table. So a fair exchange for 1 bottle of wine is between and including 2 to 5 pounds coffee. So every time Argentina sends 1 bottle of wine to Brazil, they will expect to get between 2 and 5 pounds of coffee in return. If Brazil ships 1 coffee to Argentina, the fair exchange for the coffee would be between and including 1/2 to 1/5 wine. Now you'll see, I think there's our answers, so you can go ahead and go through those. There are some unanswered questions to this, and some of them are because we make a lot of assumptions. We make assumptions that labor is labor is labor, and that you can take 1 unit of labor out of wine and put them into coffee and you'd see no difference between the two. We know that's unrealistic, but again, the ABCs. And that's what makes us have straight lines. In reality, there are no straight lines, and so it makes it a little bit more complicated as well. We also have ignored all the politics, okay, that goes into this, which is why we have a range of quantities that we can use. Okay, that's the end of this learning objective. And the one thing I was just going to say a moment ago was that many times on the test, you will see multiple problems that will draw a lot of information. So it would be, for example, C scenario 1.2, C scenario 1.2, and then it will ask you several different questions like who has the comparative advantage? Who has the absolute advantage? What's a fair price for these? So you're going to see multiple scenario problems on the first test when it comes to this learning objective, this actual chapter for chapter 3. Okay, well, thank you for your time, attention, and I think we're done with chapter 3 now. And so you got your first test coming up. Remember to use those adaptive test preps to prepare for that, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.